Der Klett-Cotta-Blog ist immer noch in Berlin. Neben mir sitzt Tom Drury. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
Just published by Klett-Cotta, a book with the title Grouse County. The readers will find 3 novels in your book: The End of Vandalism, Hunts and Dreams, and your 5th novel, The Pacific, published in 2013.
Yes.
You did not think at once about a trilogy?
No, I didn't. I started with writing, one chapter and then, or rather one sentence and then one paragraph in one chapter and then another chapter and another and, just to let it build on its own. I didn't know that I would return to these characters. Although after I finished The End of Vandalism, I wasn't surprised that I wanted to return to these characters because they were still interesting to me.
The End of Vandalism was your first novel. Did you write as a plot in mind, or did you allow to your characters to determine more or less their life?
Very much the latter. I saw that there was a kind of a broad arc of story that I wanted to follow, that Tiny and Louise would divorce, that Louise and Dan would come together and eventually be married, and that they would go through trouble in their life and they would have to see how to get out of it. But what that trouble would be and how these things would happen, I didn't know at the time. I wrote to find out, and that's what makes writing interesting for me, is to find out what is supposed to happen as opposed to knowing what is going to happen ahead of time.
Where's Grouse County? A fictional location somewhere in Iowa where you grew up?
It's if you triangulate the cities that are mentioned, you can kind of imagine that it is. You can imagine that it's Iowa. You can imagine that it's Illinois. You can imagine that it's Wisconsin. And different people have said different places. I don't really think of it as. I think of it as an imaginary space, not particularly tied to one state or one, particular locale. It's a place. In my mind that I wanted to make into a book, and so the place exists in the book.
It's a location like 100 others in the Middle West, but which is defined by its people. But I feel that your protagonists have lost a bit of her identity. They have lost the attachment to their environment, in the sense that the environment do not anymore form the characters. On the contrary, your characters define their environment. Is this right?
Yes, to some extent. I think the environment still. There's a line in the book, in The End of Vandalism, about how family farming seemed to be over. The era of family farming seemed to be over and had not been replaced by any other compelling idea. So it's a sense of a place in transition, trying to figure out what it's supposed to be and what the characters' relationships to their environment will be. It starts out. In the first novel, it's still very much a farming area. In the subsequent novels, you move a little bit more toward cities, which I think is possibly the case, because there used to be many, many, many family farms in the particular area where I grew up. And then as basically farming became more successful and more of a large-scale enterprise, a lot of those family farms went away and their houses were torn down and plowed over and made into fields so that you could grow more and more corn and soybeans.
Boris is the name of a little town, and the old Women's Springs Road has any signification come names?
Well, I think Boris comes from my love of Russian literature. And I just thought it was a funny name for a town in the Midwest. And Old Woman Springs Road is actually a place in the desert outside of Los Angeles, and it was kind of too good of a name to not use.
The inhabitants of Boris, like the Darlings, are a bit strange. That is real life, but the major themes: death, love, infidelity. Your novel is a sort or a history of social relationships?
Certainly, that was the whole idea of how I construct fiction, is basically putting characters in relationship to one another and seeing what happens. Do they fall out of love? Do they fall in love? Are they rivals? Are they allies? And again, this is part of the writing process. You sort of find out, for example, Johnny White, who runs against Dan for county sheriff, it begins as this kind of shifty character who is sort of using he claims a status as a recovered alcoholic, but people actually doubt that he was an alcoholic, and he's just using the status for political leverage. And that was sort of a surprise when I found out about him, but it made perfect sense to me as his character played out.
Sheriff Dave Norman resigns his post as a sheriff and becomes a private detective. His wife runs a store, but they just continue their lives or do not want to evaluate their course of life, or your readers should do this?
Yes, to some extent I think that's true. I try to leave a lot of room for the readers to make their own judgments about where their lives are going and how they're going and what they should do next and what mistakes have they made. But at the same time, I think there are times when I think particularly of a passage in Pacific where Louise is talking about what will happen to their house after they're gone, and it'll be as if they were never there. And so she is sort of taking a larger picture on their life and looking back at regrets and things that she wishes had turned out differently. And there's a sadness. And this happens in the middle of the night. And she says, this is what the night does to you. It makes you think sad things,
Pacific is a sort of summary of the two other books. You revisit your characters to find out how they have done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I have read in a review of Pacific in The Guardian, your style is slyly wry.
I think, I don't know what they meant by slyly wry exactly, but I do know that my first editor at The New Yorker told me at one point that the humor in my writing works best when the reader's not sure if it's supposed to be funny or not. And I've always kind of tried to follow that. So there are sentences that will strike some people as very funny, and other people will not necessarily get that humor. So there is a kind of slyness. It's a humor that doesn't announce itself with like bells and whistles and cymbals, and it's just there for you to find.
Review stresses that your novel The End of Vandalism is different from other realistic rural novels. Is this a result of a certain development which you can observe since 20, 30 years?
Different than other rural novels. I, hope so, because I'm trying to do something different. And I guess it's different in the way that it does mix humor and sadness, and sometimes in very quick succession. And so you're never perhaps quite sure how you're supposed to be responding to a situation, which seems to me true to life. And it has to do with observation. And sometimes there's just things that are, as you say, odd. I mean, I like the strange. I like the odd moments. I like the odd developments. And that's often, as I talked about structuring chapters and knowing kind of what I want to happen, but not knowing how, then I would bring in these strange moments. For example, Dan and Louise are moving in together into her farmhouse, and he is selling his trailer home. Mm-hmm. And so a farmer has bought it, and he's going to move it. And the process is they lift it with a crane, and the rigging breaks, and the trailer home is set free, and it rolls and rolls and rolls across the field and is smashed in that way. So I mean, that's odd. Yeah. And but it seemed to me like kind of a good dramatic way, comic dramatic way to end that particular phase in their relationship. And then Louise says to Dan, we had some good times in that place after it's ruined, Your
novels are a good example how the author and the reader have to work together. Mm-hmm. The work is not done when the author sends the file to the editor. The reader has to accomplish your work. What do you expect from the reader?
What I expect from the reader is I have great trust in the reader to understand what is going on and to get the nuances of it. And I like the idea of having a text that I've finished, and now it's your turn to read it and work on it and sort of help complete it by realizing it in your mind and perhaps feeling that you are a part of it. One of the great compliments that I've heard from time to time is that people will read this book and they feel like, I know these people, I feel like I have been in this place. And that's kind of, and I think part of the reason for that is because there's a lot of room for you as the reader to participate.
They find at once their own interpretation.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And like everybody else in the novel, they are looking around, seeing what people are doing and saying, is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? You know.
You was a writing instructor at the Wesleyan University, and the article about you in Wikipedia taught me that you are a visiting writer at Florida State University, La Salle University, and Yale University. It is really possible to learn writing novels, but you need also to have a bit of luck.
Yeah, sure.
Your first novel was published in 1991 by The New Yorker.
94.
94.
By
The New Yorker.
the publisher Sam Lawrence.
I guess.
The chapters,
it was a bit of luck.
11 chapters of the book were published in The New Yorker. And yeah, that was a great stroke of luck, you know. But at the same time, it was preceded by, I remember writing a short story called If You Do Not Find Us Home. You probably can't find it anywhere, but it was, I sent it out to 30 places and got 29 rejection letters, and the last letter said, okay, we'll take it. So, I mean, there is luck, but you also have to persist and realize that you're going to keep going, even if that luck doesn't come.
At the end, it's not only luck; it's also your activity.
Yeah, yeah. You have to, you have to be in a place where you can capitalize on, someone publishing you, for example. And with the New Yorker, after they published the first story, they said, send us some more. And I said, would you mind if I continue to write about the same characters? And they said, sure, So I was ready to continue to do that. And it turned out to be an incredible collaboration between me and my wonderful editor, Veronica Gang, at The New Yorker. And so that was luck for sure, and it was also hard work. And it was also audacity, because when I was at, just a graduate student at Brown, I started sending material, stories to The New Yorker, because I figured, why not?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.